Oh, good. I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about the October surprise today, and surprise, it might not be real anymore. Oh no. But first, hello, my name is V, and this is Under the Desk News, where I dive deep under the desk to find the crumpled paper trails of long forgotten history, while also gently reminding you that when everything seems like it's awful, it's going to be okay. Make sure you like and subscribe. It's October. We thought trick or treat. They gave us a trick and that's it. Does October surprise matter anymore? I don't know. So I got to thinking, what is an October surprise? And it turns out the term October surprise predates any political context by a wide margin. According to none other than the fine folks at Merriam-Webster, it used to be a marketing term used to describe autumn clothing sales. They cite a number of old newspaper articles that claim things like, "The newest fall wearables for all members of the family. A real October surprise, as every department is stocked to overflowing with just the kind of goods the people of this city and vicinity want." Or in 1950, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch promoted an October surprise for the sale of suits. $38, $38 suit. That is an October surprise. But of course, the term October surprise of today is used as a political smear tactic that is levied against candidates in the days leading up to Election Day that attempt to sway the undecided voter's opinion. Now, these October surprises are often scandalous accusations or revealing truths about the candidate or totally made up. Some people think an October surprise does have an impact on election results, but others know it is probably just a way for the legacy media to sell more papes. Last-minute plot twists are as old as storytelling itself, but for an unbelievable example of October surprises, we just need to travel back to 1920. Birtherism, rumors of forged racial identity, allegations of not just promoting but living the gay agenda. Am I speaking about a flood of mis and disinformation in the U.S. electoral politics of the past 20 years, or am I just talking about 1920. Let's set the scene for you. The year is 1920. It's the United States. Prohibition is the law of the land. Glitzy nightlife held in secret speakeasies is happening across the country, where if movies are to be believed, every man was a gangster and every woman was a promiscuous flapper with a bob haircut and a fun dress. Everyone listened to jazz, knew how to make bathtub gin, and not one person saw color. Which of course is not true. Being black in America was very dangerous in 1920. 1920 was at the end of what was known as the Great Migration, a historical event defined by the Library of Congress as when African Americans by the thousands poured into industrial cities to find work and later fill shortages created by World War I. Segregation was an understood non-negotiable, and the rights of black folks in the South were still heavily policed. This was also the era of the second rise in prominence of the Ku Klux Klan, who had a bit of an unfortunate and unearned boost in popularity because of the 1915 release of D.W. Griffith's film, The Birth of a Nation, which depicted the KKK as altruistic heroes. And we're going to explore this film in the UTDN Movie Club coming this January. So make sure you like and subscribe so you can join in on the discussion of this pivotal and horrific piece of cinema. All of that to say, the 1920s may have seemed like one big party, but it very likely was only really fun for white folks. And it is also likely that at least one white person was negatively affected by white America's hatred of minorities. Future President Warren G. Harding. Now, a few weeks before the 1920 campaign, murmurings started spreading about this man, claiming that this Ohio-born Republican whose mother called him Winnie was lying about his heritage. Specifically, he was lying about being a light-skinned black man. Now, it's been said that Warren's dear wife, Florence Flossie DeWolf, quote, wept until she was red-eyed at the prospect that she may have married a black man. Even back then, these hoes weren't loyal. The thing that sucks the most about this charge is that it was a complete lie. A man named William Chancellor, who Politico describes as famously racist, made the whole damn thing up to try and damage Harding's prospects at getting office. And it almost worked, because the Harding campaign had to stop campaigning and work overtime to prove Warren G. Harding's white credentials. Now, it's very likely that a scandal like this could have sunk Harding's chances at getting an office, but another scandal stole the press attention. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was running for president, was in the middle of his own scandal, where it was being alleged when he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he gave the okay for the Navy to investigate allegations of rampant homosexuality at a naval base. It wasn't just that was the problem, though. FDR hired people and told them to participate in homosexual acts in order to gain first-hand evidence that would stand up in court. So to recap, Warren G. Harding is being accused of being black, which was not true, and FDR is being accused of asking the Navy to root out gay folks by having gay sex with them. And somehow that was true. Both ended up winning their elections. So why am I talking about this age-old 1920s political gossip from a century ago? Because both of these stories are examples, one successful and one a big old flop, of something called the October surprise. As Taylor Gay puts it for Politico, an October surprise can be happenstance or deliberately orchestrated. International, something like the outbreak of a war, or domestic, like a massive economic rally. Sometimes it's personal, with a long hidden skeleton spilling out from a candidate's closet. It can save a political campaign as quickly as it can wreck one. And occasionally, it can even decide an election and set the course for the nation. What about modern history? Has there been an October surprise this go around? And if there has been, who will survive this election and what will become of them? So let's think about the October surprises of right now. 2024 has already had its share of complete electoral shakeups, from the not one but two alleged assassination attempts on former President Trump, to sitting President Joe Biden dropping out of the race, to Kamala Harris rising to become a historic candidate in so many ways. I mean, the list of October, September, November, August surprises goes on and on. So could there even be an October surprise this year? And would it even matter if there was one? Right now, we are in a period of peak election news, where every single controversy is one that seems to be treated as the defining moment on the election trail. In October alone, we had a 3-day dockworker strike. October surprise. We had the double tragedies of Hurricanes Helene and Hurricane Milton. October surprise. We had a shocking revelation in Bob Woodward's new book, War, that alleges Trump secretly sent COVID-19 test machines to Vladimir Putin at a time when they were not commercially available and Americans really needed them. October surprise. All of those things happened in October. But have any of them stuck? Does anybody care? The truth is, the list of unusual things in this election cycle goes on and on and on, and I think you get the point. The October surprise is a real thing with a varying degree of success, and it's not so successful as of lately. I mean, even in the 2020 election, the term October surprise was being overused so freely that basically anything election related was being referred to by the press as an October surprise. Trump has COVID, October surprise. Hunter Biden's laptop, October surprise. Trump P-tape, oh my gosh, remember that? October surprise. Everything is an October surprise now. But if everything is a surprise, then isn't nothing really a surprise? For me, I think the October surprise hasn't really been a thing since the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter. Back in 1980, something called the Iranian hostage crisis was happening, where over 50 American citizens were being held hostage at the American embassy in Tehran, and they had been held there for almost a year. Now, this would be a huge deal today, and it was certainly a huge deal then. A major part of the Reagan election campaign was a promise to free the hostages who had been held in captivity for almost a year during Carter's term. I don't know that Ronald Reagan's team went into it and said, let's construct an October surprise, so much as they were trying to get some last-minute fudgery in an attempt to beat Jimmy Carter. But the real reason why Reagan started promising to free the hostages is because his campaign was under the belief, which actually ended up being a false one, that Jimmy Carter had already secured the release of the hostages, and that Carter was planning to announce it right before the election. Reagan campaign manager William Casey even spoke to Time magazine about this, resulting in one of the most iconic moments in U.S. electoral politics. They wrote that Reagan's campaign, quote, expects Carter will pull what they call the October surprise, meaning shortly before Election Day, he will inflate the importance of some overseas event in an attempt to rally the country around him. Reagan was so convinced that Carter was going to have those hostages released that he made up a promise saying that he was going to get them released, and then it didn't happen. The election happened. Reagan won. And the hostages tragically stayed put in Tehran. Though, interestingly enough, the hostages were released, and I shit you not, they were released minutes after Reagan finished his inaugural address in January of 1981. Because of this timing, people thought that Iran was in cahoots with the Reagan administration to try and interfere in the election and cost Carter the election. But a congressional investigation found that there was no evidence of conspiracy between Iran and the Reagan campaign. It was just truly a crazy coincidence and very interesting timing. And while all of that is interesting, it's a little ironic that the October surprise became a thing in a year where there was no October surprise. There has been a major surprise in every election pretty much every year since. The rest of the 80s themselves were pretty quiet, but starting in 1992, we see the October surprise against George H.W. Bush, who basically had his re-election chances tanked when Reagan's former Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, was indicted for his involvement with the Iran-Contra affair. And since H.W. Sr. was Reagan's VP, it was really easy to tie the stink of the situation to him, and considering the allegations were that Ronald Reagan had authorized the sale of weapons to Iran illegally to funnel money to the Contras, an anti-socialist army in Nicaragua, H.W. Sr. certainly didn't smell like roses at the end of that. Bush lost, Clinton won, and the rest is history. The only problem here, Weinberger wasn't indicted in October. So this was an October surprise that didn't even happen in October. One that did happen in October, however, was during the 2000 election between George W. Bush, son of H.W. Sr., and Vice President Al Gore. This is the one where Fox News broke the news that Bush had been arrested for drunk driving back in 1976 and painted an elaborate photo of a hard-partying bumpkin who wasn't fit for office. Imagine a time when Fox News was against the Republican candidate. This very likely could have been the moment that handed Gore the election entirely, were it not for the infamous Florida recount that resulted in Bush sneaking by with a mere 5 electoral votes advantage. So the verdict? Again, not really a successful October surprise, not really an unsuccessful one either, but at least these events actually took place in October. Between then and now, there was the October 2004 video where Osama bin Laden dropped a video not only claiming responsibility for the attacks on 9/11, but directly calling out Bush as a dictator, and Bush still won. In 2008, there was a stock market crash that coincided with public opinion turning against Republican candidate John McCain because John McCain was increasingly looking like a wealthy insider. Remember when he forgot how many homes he owned during an interview? You don't forget how many homes you own, John McCain. Maybe you lose track of your daily caloric intake. Maybe you forget what shoes you own, but you don't forget how many homes you own. Forgetting how many homes you own, that's Scrooge McDuck stuff, okay? How's that swimming pool full of gold coins treating ya? This one worked. This October surprise was achieved. In 2012, there was that leaked videotape that came out where Republican candidate and future Senator Mitt Romney spoke patronizingly about Americans who wouldn't vote for him. You may remember this as the 47% tape, not to be confused with the binders full of women, not to be confused with the time he admitted to putting his dog on the roof rack of his car. In the 47% tape, he said, there's 47% of people who will vote for the president no matter what, all right. And then there are 47% of people who are reliant on the government, who believe they are victims, and who will believe the government has a responsibility to take care of him. This did not go good for old Mittens, and the Obama campaign seized on every opportunity to dunk on Mitt for appearing to be an elitist prick. Good job, October surprise. 2016 saw perhaps the most successful weaponization of the October surprise yet, with not one, not two, but a metric fuck ton of surprises. The infamous Trump tape where he openly admits to essaying women, the Trump tax return scandal where it turned out he hadn't paid federal taxes in like 18 years, Clinton's speeches to Wall Street donors being leaked by WikiLeaks, and perhaps most effective, on October 28th, only 11 days before the election, FBI Director James Comey made the announcement that an investigation had been reopened into her emails. You remember, this moment was likely the moment Clinton lost the 2016 election. The most tragically effective use of the October surprise yet by a campaign. But if we're generous with the concept of October surprise and we open it up to examples like we shared at the start, this kind of last-minute fuckery that sinks elections is absolutely nothing new. In 1840, President Martin Van Buren was accused by the Whig Party of paying Pennsylvanians to vote in New York, which at the time was considered an important swing state. Van Buren ended up losing the election following inflammatory headlines like "A gigantic plot to elect Harrison by fraud" and "Sound the alarm, your liberties are in danger." And in the 1870s, when Chinese immigration was the hot issue of the day, Republican candidate James Garfield almost lost the election due to a forged letter allegedly written by Garfield to a man named H.L. Morey. The letter was only 3 sentences long and claimed that Garfield was incredibly pro-Chinese immigration. Amazing that being pro-immigration could potentially sink a campaign. Different times. The letter, of course, was a forgery, and H.L. Morey wasn't even a real person. Garfield ended up winning the election with 214 electoral votes, though the damage did result in him losing the state of California. In conclusion, by briefly going over the history of the October surprise, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, Do major bombshells like this have a tendency to actually change the results of an election in major ways? For instance, what would it take to throw the 2024 election in a decisive way? WTOL out of Ohio did an article about the history of the October surprise where they stated, while some evidence and the examples do seem to indicate an October surprise could affect the outcome of an election, many political scholars say it is actually the narrative surrounding the event rather than the event itself that impacts voters. And I think that is ultimately the most important factor when considering the legacy of October surprise. Is it actually the surprise, or is it the way the media spins it? There are plenty of controversies that have occurred throughout history in or out of the month of October that with the right narrative could sink any political prospect. The Warren G. Harding controversy over if he was a black man or not would be a complete non-issue in the 2020s. But the FDR gay for pay controversy may have prevented FDR from ever serving in public office in modern times. The truth is, it's not really the surprise that changes the course of history, it's the media framing that changes the narrative through and through. Had Jimmy Carter secretly negotiated the release of those hostages, maybe it would have changed the course of history and maybe he would have won re-election. And that's an alternate universe that would have directly changed the United States in massive ways, especially considering the way that Reagan navigated everything in the 1980s, from the AIDS crisis to the creation of privatized student loans to the Iran-Contra affair and so on and so on and so on. We can only wonder how a second Carter administration would have changed the shape of the 80s. But that's a reality we'll never know. So back to the original question, will an October surprise shake this election? Time can only tell on this one, but the truth is, even if there is an October surprise for the candidate of your choice, the best thing you can do is inform yourself. You got to look deeper into the story and figure it out. Is this a craven attempt to turn an election through a really good story? Or is the October surprise actually a revelation of misconduct? Look deeper into all of the stories you hear. We are actually more likely to be triggered by misinformation if we like that misinformation than if we think it's a bold-faced lie. So when you see an October surprise come your way, think, is this actually misconduct, or am I just like thirsty for drama? No matter what it is, as long as we can all recognize that the October surprise is often more surprising for even being called a surprise, we'll be okay.